Well, what do you make of the criticism that one of the reasons why your party was so resoundingly rejected last November is because Democrats were gaslighting the country, saying that inflation was not a big deal, heralding Bidenomics. Not only Biden, but Kamala Harris was heralding Bidenomics, pretending that there wasn't a problem at the border. And then fundamentally, this idea that President Biden was up for another 4 years of the job, while Americans in poll after poll for year after year were saying he's too old to do the job. Your party stood against all of those things. Don't you think your party needs to acknowledge that President Biden was not up for the job of running for reelection and that this was a major mistake by the
He made that decision.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another video. So in this interview with Jake Tapper and Tim Walz, you are going to witness Jake Tapper finally doing his job. Anyway, let's not waste any time and get straight into the video.
So we heard your former running mate Kamala Harris say she's not here to say I told you so, although obviously that's what she was saying about all the Trump chaos. We're saying, I have to say though, what does I told you so really mean here? I mean, people heard her message. They did not vote for her. She lost every battleground state. You yourself have criticized the Harris-Walz campaign for being too cautious. She may have told the American people, she may have warned the American people, but she didn't do it compellingly enough to win.
That is the absolute point. And look, when I criticize, I'm criticizing myself. I own this. I'm part of the ticket. And somebody has to come up with a strategy. I think this is exactly right. This is the thing. Look, Democrats, it was a good night in Wisconsin. I was over there. We saw that happen. Donald Trump's doing this. Just to be clear, nobody on the Democratic side is celebrating this, and those folks in the street are not celebrating that Donald Trump's making all these errors. I think what the vice president's saying is that was pretty self-evident that he was going to do that. I do think the challenge for Democrats, and this is, I think, a structural problem that's going to take a lot more thinking, why, with all of that out there, did they not think we were any better than that? And they didn't. And I'm very concerned with the folks who stayed home. And these are folks that I'll say once again, Donald Trump has identified their angst. They can't buy a house. They can't afford to get a good education. They're concerned that their economic future is so precarious it could slip out from under them. Less than half of Americans have $1,000 in savings. And I think, why was it not so compelling? It should have been a slam dunk for us to say, we're the party that cares about that. We're the party that's going to protect Social Security and Medicare. We're the party that thinks the ACA is a good start, but we need to do more on health care. And we didn't do that. So I'm concerned. Democrats do well in special elections and off-year elections, but the electorate that comes in presidential election years is different. When I was young, it was easy to know what a Democrat was. They stood with the working class and labor. Republicans were country club and for the rich. Today, you ask people, they don't. We have a 29% approval rating. It doesn't help us any that Donald Trump ends up with a 25% approval rating. We have to get back to the core issues, that this is about making America prosperous and stable and innovative for everybody.
Well, what do you make of the criticism that one of the reasons why your party was so resoundingly rejected last November is because Democrats were gaslighting the country, saying that inflation was not a big deal, heralding Bidenomics. Not only Biden, but Kamala Harris was heralding Bidenomics, pretending that there wasn't a problem at the border. And then fundamentally, this idea that President Biden was up for another 4 years of the job, while Americans in poll after poll for year after year were saying he's too old to do the job. Your party stood against all of those things.
Look, Joe Biden coming in and doing COVID and being a governor through COVID did a hell of a job. But I think one of the things that we didn't do is we assumed that we said, and it was true, that we were going to have a soft landing and our economy was better than the rest of the world. Better for who? Better for the working class who was saying groceries were too expensive, as they are now and going up. They got to see us talk about things. Again, I go back to this. Don't talk about food insecurity or housing type of issues. Talk about people being hungry and wondering where they're going to live, or about their children's future, about real security. And so I think your question is spot on. I think we got intellectualized on this. I think the fact of the matter is Joe Biden did soft land the economy. He did usher us through COVID. None of us are saying we should be soft on the border, but we allow a vacuum, and Donald Trump fills it, the 800-pound gorilla, and their narrative starts to stick, and we look weak. We look weak like we don't care. We look like we look, Jake, I'm not going to say, we need to do is we need to just arrest people and ship them to El Salvador. No, we need to do invest the money on border. We need to make sure that we have the judges necessary to adjudicate things faster. We need to make sure if you're going to be in this country here legally, and when you are, you're going to be uplifted, celebrated, and part of this great American tapestry. We didn't do that, and then it fills them. They'll find the example that is horrific where you have someone who's not here legally and they commit a crime. That is horrific, but we don't do a good job of telling that.
Don't you think your party needs to acknowledge that President Biden was not up for the job of running for re-election and that this was a major mistake by the
He made that decision.
I know, but you all went along with the idea that he was
decision.
up for it, and he wasn't. And everybody saw it, and the country rejected it.
Yeah, well, look, history will tell us to go back on that. That very well could be the case, Jake. What I'm concerned about is learning from those lessons. I would hope we would never do it again, make a mistake, make sure we go through and get someone. But I don't know where it helps us going forward. I certainly am deeply concerned that Donald Trump is going to lead us down a horrific... Look, thank God it's tariffs that he said. Donald Trump listens to no one. Remember, Donald Trump has statements about, I don't think nuclear war would be that bad. I guess we're lucky that he went after tariffs instead of that route. Yeah. We have an issue in this country that is going to impact us. And if there is not a loyal opposition, if there's not some soul searching on our side, if there's not reaching out to those folks who are in the streets, they're leading right now.
So quick question.
I would tell everybody, you better get with them. Yeah.
Quick question, because we got to go. But you said you're not going to run for the Senate seat there. Are you going to run for a third term for governor? Are you possibly going to run for president in 2028?
Well, I'm certainly thinking about running again in Minnesota if that's what they want. I am not thinking about running in 2028. And my advice to folks is if in this moment you're planning for 2028, you're going to get rolled by the people in the streets. You just need to be out there making sure you're helping and doing things like Cory Booker's doing things like Bernie Sanders, AOC, things that we see people out talking to folks. So for me, I'm going to get through this legislative session. If the folks in Minnesota want me, I'm kind of inclined to do that. And I just want to play my part to make sure we cannot afford to allow Donald Trump or his successor to go forward because you're seeing the pain.
Yeah, so what I find interesting about this whole little conversation that they had is how Jake Tapper is going to sit there and act like he wasn't also part of the problem. I mean, come on now. Jake and CNN and most of the mainstream media was literally part of the gaslighting. Y'all sat there and gaslit the American people and helped the Democrats. I mean, the mainstream media was practically an arm of the Democratic Party. Most of the media was helping push the Democrats in their agenda, in their rhetoric, and also Trump derangement. So Jake's sitting there and acting as if like he's holier than thou and he's holding the Democrats accountable to something as if he don't need to be held accountable. His own network don't need to be held accountable. This is absolutely hilarious. It's funny how all of a sudden, all of these mainstream media journalists are starting to distance themselves from the Democrats, right? Or the rhetoric that they try to help push. All of a sudden now, they're wanting to call out the Democrats and their gaslighting when they had 4 years to call out the lying, the gaslighting. But instead, y'all were pushing Trump derangement. This is just absolutely hilarious to witness. And one thing that Jake got right is telling Tim that, hey, your party needs to come out and acknowledge that what you said about Joe Biden was wrong. It was a lie. I mean, the books that are coming out nowadays are exposing it anyway. But the party as a whole need to come out and admit that they were wrong. They need to come out and admit that they were wrong about everything. That's why there's a lack of credibility, right? That's why it exists at this moment that nobody trusts the Democrats, is because they haven't even admitted to the wrongdoings, telling people that Joe Biden was perfectly fine and all of his mishaps were cheap fake, right? Telling us that inflation is not real or inflation is transitory, or just flat out coming out and saying that things are not expensive, right? There is no price increase, right? Y'all are gaslighting us to the extreme because now you're coming out and saying eggs are too expensive, gas are too expensive, right? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. How is it that now things are too expensive when the last 4 years y'all didn't say that? Why is that? Well, because you're trying to blame the cost of goods on Donald Trump. That's why now you're admitting to things being expensive when you didn't admit that things were expensive the last 4 years, right? So this is nonsense. That's why the lack of credibility exists. Y'all told us that there was no the border open border, right? Y'all told us the border was closed, that there was no mass illegal immigration into this country. I mean, the amount of lying and gaslighting that these people did is going to take decades for them to clean up, because that's the first step into regaining any type of credibility, is admitting fault, admitting mistake. But what they rather do is come out and basically complain about everything that Donald Trump is doing. That's it. That's their motto. That's their playbook. And it's just not working for these people. But Jake, we finally appreciate you trying to do your job. I mean, you should have been doing your job, but it seems like you're at least trying to hold somebody accountable, right? It's actually pretty entertaining to witness, because y'all are technically on the same side here. From our perspective, I can tell you this now. From Americans, from American citizens, from conservatives, there's really no difference between you mainstream media journalists and the Democrat politicians. There's really no difference. Y'all are just the mouthpiece for the Democrats. So when we finally see you guys starting to call them out and question them on your network, it is a surprise to most of us. It is a complete shock to witness you calling out your puppet masters, essentially. Hilarious. But hey, this is pure entertainment for all of us on this side. But anyway, let me know what you guys think about this video. Let's talk about it in the comment section down below. And of course, if you are brand new, consider hitting subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.